thank you for joining us at the ever-improving No Soundbites Allowed podcast. My name is Michael Vasquez. We thank you for joining us in this adventure of describing the politics that go on in our nation on a personal and local level as often as possible, giving you, the audience, more than just 30 seconds to understand what's going on in our nation. We look forward to joining you as we go. Just sit back, enjoy the ride. Please remember, if you like the episodes, like it, share it, let other people know, and if you can, please donate, even if it's $2, even if it's $5, because it all makes a difference. We thank you, and here we go.
Well, hello, everybody. And it's always good to have you here with me. This is Michael Voss, the Dragon of the Southern Tier, your favorite host, and I'm happy to be here with you today. We're doing a midweek episode here just because there's a few things that have happened I think are of very much interest to all of the listeners out there, and it affects the upcoming midterm elections. There's a bit of news on a couple of different fronts, and I want to go over that. Now, the first thing, of course, is Newsflash. I do like my sound effects there. And the sound effect is because yesterday, which would be May 22nd, was the announcement by Nick Libous, who is the son of Tom Libous, formerly of the state Senate for New York. And he has just announced that he's going to be running for the Assembly for the 122nd seat. Now, this is actually big news in this region, in the southern tier of New York, because that seat is currently held by Clifford Crouch. Assemblyman Crouch has been in office for 23 years. So that's a long time. And he's gone, at least from 2006 going forward, has never received anyone who has challenged him. It has been an exceedingly long time since he ever ran into a challenger, even though he's a Republican, even though this is New York State, and even though part of the area that is the 122nd district includes the county of Broome and the city of Binghamton, which has Binghamton University and, of course, a very large liberal base. So it's a bit surprising when you look at this and say, okay, well, Assemblyman Crouch, he's a Republican. He's been in for 23 years. That's a long time. And in fact, he's 73 right now, and he was expected to actually retire. A lot of conversation was going on prior to his announcement in April that he was going to be retiring. And there was a lot of question about who would be replacing him and whether there would be an election or if he had a successor. And that was kind of up in the air. As it wound up, and I know you probably noticed, I said when he made the announcement in April. And that's kind of big news because he actually made the announcement that he was going to seek re-election in April. Nobody cared. Nobody cared at all. That news came and went, and absolutely everybody was just, okay. There was a couple of news reports, but nothing big, nothing important. No one was really paying attention to it. It wasn't a big deal. But it became a big deal because then there was a lot of news, and I heard the rumors myself, and I had been checking on some of the information, and many people knew that there was going to be a challenger to Clifford Crouch for the 122nd seat. And it was actually known before Mr. Crouch actually made the announcement in April. So for some time now, people have been waiting to hear who is going to make the first announcement, where the announcements were going to come from. And so we did hear about this. That was the rumor mill. That were the announcements, the things that were going on the inside baseball, so to speak. And so when he came out with his announcement and nothing happened and no one said anything, no one paid attention, it wasn't a big deal. And then we started hearing news announcements. Well, we started hearing large rumors that there was going to be a challenger. And suddenly, on May 20, it was last week, we saw that, actually it was May 16th, that Clifford Crouch came out and made the second re-election announcement. This time, The announcement was actually made in part and pretty much pushed by the chairman of the Broome County Republicans, which is a Mr. B. Joy Data. And Mr. Data came out, and there was a big announcement by him, which in April there was no announcement. And then, quite interestingly, Mr. Data announced and pushed out that there were 50 elected officials, 50 significant Republicans in the Southern Tier region that all endorsed Mr. Crouch. That is unusual. And when I say it's unusual, I mean it doesn't happen. That never happens. To give you an example, Congresswoman Claudia Tenney, a senior elected official with a far more bigger reach, far more important office. I mean, the Congress is held by Republicans. It's an important seat. Democrats have been saying for years that they are desperate to get this seat and to knock out the Republicans in central New York. They've spent over $13 million just in 2016 alone to try and take over this seat. And projections are they're going to spend at least 7, 8, possibly up to $15 million in 2018 to take the New York 22nd district seat from Congresswoman Claudia Tenney, who is expected to win. So that's a big, contentious, huge race. Didn't get 50 Republicans from the Southern Tier to back her up. We see that New York State Senator Fred Akshar for the 52nd district is wildly popular. He won his race by about 71%. He is wildly popular at this time and is expected to win his reelection somewhere in the 60 percentile range, if not more. He is out doing his job and well liked by all of the elected officials in the region, Democrats and Republicans alike, and was even so popular as he was offered the lieutenant governor seat in the race by Mark Molinaro, who is now running for governor of New York. So that's a big race. That's a big deal. And that's also someone who is very important. Matter of fact, if you see SUNY Broome Republicans, you've heard we've had 2 exclusive interviews with him. And he's doing a lot of work to try and improve the economy and the quality of life here in New York. And he didn't get 50 Republicans from the Southern Tier that were endorsing him. Not nearly. Matter of fact, there is no Republican I can think of that has gotten 50 Republicans. And when I say that, I mean the elected officials, the senior officials in the Southern Tier region. I just can't name a politician. Mayor David, who was well liked, won his reelection bid with 2-1 versus his challenger, is liked by Democrats and Republicans alike, and is doing a solid and fantastic job. Didn't get 50 of the Southern Tier elected officials to give him an endorsement. No one's done it. And suddenly Clifford Crouch got it. When I see something like that that is so extreme and so outside the norm, I have to always ask, and I did at that time, what does that mean? And in fact, on the day that he came out and made his announcement, and we got the emails and we saw the announcement by Chairman Data that said 50 Republican elected officials all signed on to say, hey, they endorse him. I said, and I sent out a tweet stating, that seems odd. And I also asked Mr. Crouch, who appeared on WNBF, and that'll be important a little bit later, are you going to finish your term? Because we all expected him to retire. And so it made me wonder, it brought up some questions for me. And he said he had every intention to do so. Well, as it turns out, on the 22nd, we found out a little bit more because Mr. Nick Libous actually went forward and he announced that he is going to be challenging and that he is going to be running. And he has gotten an immense amount of feedback, positive feedback. He has been covered by every news organization in the area, and it is big news. Large, when I say large news, big news, we're talking about the front page of newspapers. We're talking about not just one column, not just two columns. 3-column coverage on the first page. That's a big deal. Okay. That's how newspapers rate the quality and the importance of a story, especially on the front page. If you've got the full page, it's a big announcement. If you've got half the page, it's a big announcement. If you make it to the first page, it's a big announcement. The more columns and the more space they're dedicating on that front page to sell that newspaper, the more important they believe that story is. And he was on several of the front pages. Mind you, Clifford Crouch, Assemblyman, good man, done a great job. That's why he's been around for 23 years. And I have no question about that. I don't question his character. Please I hope it doesn't come across that way. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that this looks to be like quite the race. It looks to be quite interesting. And there seems to be a lot going on, just beneath the water here. And I expect that we're going to hear a lot more about it. And with that said, I will make the announcement, that I request from Assemblyman Clifford Crouch and from his challenger, Nick Libous, both Republicans, to come onto this program and to tell us about themselves and why they should be reelected. In the case of Mr. Crouch, to be reelected. In the case of Mr. Libous, to be elected in the first place. And learn more about them and learn who are these individuals and and then you, the listener, will be able to make a choice, whatever you think is best. And there is no Democrat. Once again, if it seems that if Mr. Libous did not step forward, he would have, Mr. Crouch would have wound up being unchallenged once again. So it makes it interesting. And I always personally believe that it's a positive to see a challenge within any party or to any candidates. No candidate should go unchallenged. There should always be a challenge. We should always have a choice to see who's the best of the choices we have available. And that's something I think is very positive. And of course, I am a proponent of term limits, as Mr. Libous has mentioned. And obviously Mr. Crouch is not. So it makes it a very interesting race looking at the different views that are there, although they're all under the same Republican umbrella. And there is no real question about the quality of service. It's about what would be the best thing going forward. So it's quite interesting. And I do want to find out more about it. I think you'll find it quite interesting. And so I wanted to bring that up just so you know a little bit more about it. And hopefully we'll hear back from either Nick Libous or we'll be hearing from Assemblyman Crouch, and you'll be able to know more about them, and we'll see what comes from that. So with that, that's the first thing I wanted to talk about. But that's not the only thing that's happened, because on Monday there was a huge thing with Assemblyman Anthony Brindisi, who happened to come to Binghamton, New York, and he was speaking here. He's running for the New York 22nd District, challenging, as I mentioned before, incumbent Congresswoman Claudia Tenney. And it's quite interesting to hear what he has to say. And what I'm going to do once we come back in the next couple of segments, I'm not just going to say what happened, because he was at the event. It was in Binghamton, New York at the VFW Post 1645. And I'm not just going to say what happened. I'm actually going to play for you audio tape that I was able to receive, because it was not allowed. No recordings were allowed in the event. And I literally had Ellen Foster of the Brindisi campaign come over and directly request on behalf of Mr. Brindisi that my recording device, my camera, would be turned off, and I was not allowed to record there on threat of being kicked out of the event. So but I was able to receive other individuals in the location were actually taking recordings, and they were able to provide me one. And I won't mention their name because I don't want them to get in trouble or banned or anything like that. But I did receive it, and I do have audio of his event, and I do want to play that for you so that you'll have full context and you'll hear for yourself what was going on. And I'll talk about it a little bit as we play it, as well as the reaction from WNBF, which happened also on, that was the meeting with Mr. Brindisi was on the 21st. The WNBF incident was on the 22nd. I think you'll find that interesting as well. So you're going to hear about all of this, and it's actual live recordings. So you'll have that in full context, and then you'll be able to make your own decision about all of that. So if you'll bear with me, I will be right back in just a moment, and we'll have a little musical interlude. Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming back to the ever-popular No Soundbites Allowed with your host, Michael Voss, the Dragon of the Southern Tier, and I want to thank you, each and every one of you, for being here, being part of our audience. It's because of you. It's because of you that it all makes it worthwhile. I thank you for that, and I do appreciate it, because it's very important. You're the reason why I do this on a regular basis, because it's important to be able to hear what's going on around us, to hear about the announcements, to hear about some of the things that are going on behind the scenes, to be able to make the best choices in terms of who are going to be our elected officials, in terms of supporting a bill, a new piece of legislation, anything that affects our lives every single day. And that's what this is all about, the things that affect our lives every single day. And speaking of that, I want to go into what I had promised before, and it's a little bit of, it's a news flash, but I'm going to do that. Hold off on that second. First, actually, I want to put this in context. I want to put you in the proper mindset for this. And I think one of the best ways to be able to do that, I was watching, I do a lot of research. I was actually recently reviewing the Rubin Report. You can find that on YouTube. It's called Rubin, R-U-B-I-N Report. And this is from January 31st of 2018. And the host, Dave Rubin, was speaking with Mr. Ben Shapiro and also Jordan Peterson. All of them are rather big names, been in a lot of news media, very popular. And I was listening to one of the answers by Jordan Peterson, and it struck me, especially as I was preparing to get this episode of our podcast done, and I wanted to play that for you, and then I'll put that in context, and then I'll put on Mr. Brindisi and what he in fact said word for word. So let me pause. You're going to hear that. The next thing is going to be Jordan Peterson speaking to Dave Rubin and Ben Shapiro on January 31st, 2018.
Yeah, well, the funny thing about her argument is that it was predicated on the idea that somehow people have a right to be comfortable. It's like, that's just not a right you have in life. Of all the things you can say that you don't have a right to in life, being comfortable is number one.
Yeah, but you made that point to him. You can offend me right now,
well,
right?
So the thing is if your right to be comfortable trumps my right to talk, then I don't get to talk, ever. Because I'm going to say things, if I'm actually talking, I'm going to say things. If they're profound things, if they're contentious things or truthful things, I'm going to say things that, if they don't disturb you, are going to disturb you. And if they don't disturb you, there's someone that's going to be disturbed about them. So what's the answer to that? Everyone can be comfortable in the silence. But that also doesn't work, because then we can't exchange ideas. We're not comfortable in the silence. We're isolated and dead in the silence. So it's a completely incoherent perspective.
But what does that tell you about just the way mainstream media operates?
Now, I played that because I think it's very important. It gives a context, because there is a big move for comfort, and that's true with politicians and anyone else throughout the nation. And I believe that Many politicians want to be comfortable. They would prefer a silence. They prefer not to hear from their constituents. They would prefer to be able to do whatever they want. They don't want to be questioned. And I know that it's not comfortable to do that. Sometimes you don't want to answer the tough questions. I know. I've been a candidate for Congress myself. I've spoken to many, many politicians. It's hard to ask the tough question. It's hard to answer the tough question. But it's also very important, because if we don't, as Mr. Peterson mentioned, then you get the silence of the death. You know, that makes us dead inside. It makes us dead politically and personally. It leaves us in a void, and there is no freedom. There is no growth from that. So it's always very important. And you can't, and that's where apathy, the voter apathy, comes from. When we can't get those answers, when no one's asking the questions and politicians are left our own. And that's where the corruption in New York State comes from. Now, I say all of that because I did make Mr. Brindisi, who I've known for 5 years now, and I've spoken with him. I've done reviews and reports and on him, and as well as podcasts on his career and his record. So what you're going to hear next is me asking him a question, and it's not necessarily comfortable, but it is important. And so I want you to hear what he has to say. Please pay attention to not only my question, but what is he actually saying versus my question. And I'm going to go over that with you in a second. But for right now, we're going to go and you're going to hear the news flash, and then you're going to hear right after that my question, and then Anthony Brindisi answering at the VFW Post 1645 in Binghamton, New York on May 21st. Newsflash. Newsflash.
Thanks for coming out, and the floor is yours. Mike.
Assemblyman Brindisi, it's always good to hear from you, and I'm glad to have this opportunity to speak with you. I know trust and also character are very big things for any candidate in any election. And because of that, I have a question for you in reference to the ongoing scandal that's been going on in the Utica area for the last 5 months, which involves you $300 million for a hospital, emails that were only revealed to the public by a Freedom of Information Act, and the impending and proposed removal, eminent domain, denying your constituents the opportunity to have their homes that's going to be taken away. You've been identified as being central in this, especially in your emails, and as you mentioned, you're talking about how you work, and anyone should, to work together, and yet in your emails on the FOIA, you identify how you're shutting down your voices of your constituents in this same scandal. Can you discuss that a bit?
I'll do my best, and I'm not sure how many people in the Binghamton area care about a Utica hospital, but I'll go through that real quick because Michael brought it up here. So the state was able to provide $300 million to build a new healthcare facility in the city of Utica. I worked with my colleague Senator Griffo, who's a Republican, to help secure that money. Utica has 2 aging hospitals, and we're consolidating them into one healthcare facility. It's going to be going into the downtown region of Utica. There are many benefits to having this new facility by having one campus for a hospital, by having all treatment under one roof. And frankly, Utica has been trying to work towards getting a new hospital for a long time, so I'm very pleased to be able to help secure that money. The area of the city that it's going to is an area of town that has been neglected for many, many years. There's a lot of blight in the area, a lot of city-owned properties that have not been able to be brought back onto the tax rolls. And like many new healthcare facilities in downtown areas, this one is expected to create more jobs, more retail, more apartments, and things like that in the surrounding community. Obviously, with any project and any change, there's going to be people who are against the project, and there are people who are against a hospital going downtown. But I'm very proud that we secured this money. I'm working with our hospital system because I want to make sure that when this building is constructed, that those jobs are union jobs, that we have a project labor agreement on this project. Because we want to make sure want to make sure that this hospital is built by local workers, union workers. I was very instrumental when I was back on the school board in the city of Utica. We had a $180 million construction project, and I was one who helped negotiate a project labor agreement. And I can tell you that that has been a great success. We have on time, on budget, using 100% local workforces, which I want to see on this construction project, which is at its height is going to create 1,000 construction jobs for all of New York State. We're not going to have enough in our area to be able to fill this role, so we're going to be importing some folks from the southern tier to come up and help build that hospital, and we need these good paying jobs.
Didn't answer.
All right, folks. So you got to hear exactly what was said, both by Assemblyman Anthony Brindisi and by myself. And I want to go over that a little bit, just very briefly, because again, just as Jordan Peterson had mentioned, it's uncomfortable. I get that. And I can understand that Assemblyman Brindisi prefers the comfort zone that he wants, and to not have the question and to have a silence, which would result in the political death for the area. But here's what we were talking about, because my question was very specific, and I was asking about this. How do we have trust in a politician that has done something that seems to be untrustworthy? And he didn't go into it. He didn't answer this at all. Why? Because remember, I mentioned there's FOIAs. There was actually a FOIA. See, let me start even further. A recent Zogby poll shows that actually 37% of the population in Utica don't want this hospital. So it's not just some people. It's fully a third of all the population. Only 29% actually are looking at having this. They're interested in it. So 37% of the population, the majority of all those polled, say they don't want it. And there is a supreme opposition to this. And that opposition is because this deal was set up without talking to the public at all. No one was informed of this. It's a big deal. And I've gone into this in some detail in a prior podcast, but that's what the FOIAs are so important about. The Freedom of Information Act emails that detail exactly what was said. It was a backroom deal, kind of like what Governor Cuomo has done, kind of like how the Obamacare was passed. It was a backroom deal just between Anthony Brindisi, Anthony Picenti, the county executive of Oneida County, the it's in my prior, I don't remember his name, in charge of the MVHC, which is the Mohawk Valley Health Commission. And they, about 4 or 5 men, got together, made a deal amongst themselves about creating the hospital and putting the hospital in downtown Utica in this location where the public doesn't want it. And they'd made that deal while telling the public at the exact same time, and I will link the article where I show the timeline of this. They're talking amongst themselves about how they're going to get this done, and the public is being told, well, no, we're going to get public input. We want your questions. We want to talk to you about it, even though they had solidified it. They then went further with Ray Meyer's help and Senator Griffo, who was told what to do. He wasn't asked. He wasn't invited in this. He wasn't involved in the emails. He was told, according to Anthony Picenti and also Anthony Brindisi, that they would tell Griffo what he needed to do. So that's not quite the same picture in this. And then he goes on in his emails to shut down any public questions. Again, he's creating silence. He wants his comfort of not having a question and not having to answer to any of his constituents. That's what his email says. And the FOIA emails are available publicly. You can look this all up. I'm not making anything up. I have written articles about it. I have articles. You can see the Oneida Dispatch. You can see WRVO and WUTQ have had extensive coverage on this Utica hospital scandal, which has been going on since January of 2018. And the scandal has continued and it is ongoing. So we're about to hit month 6 of this. So I find that very interesting. And I also find it very interesting that for someone who wants to be congressman of the New York 22nd District, that is 2.5 hours north to south an hour and a half east to west. He doesn't believe that people should know about what's happening in Utica because they're in the southern tier. So just because we're in a different part of his district that he hopes to be able to represent, to go to Congress for, he only wants people in Utica to know about certain things, and people in Binghamton and Broome County to know about certain things. People in Cortland won't know about any of that, and the people in Norwich won't know about it. He doesn't want people to know, all of the people to know what's actually going on. He's giving them all different answers, perhaps. Because what other reason would there be to not tell people about what's going on in Utica? What's the reason not to tell people in Utica about what's going on in Binghamton or in Cortland or in Norwich? Why is it separated? Why is he not telling everyone? So he's not giving everyone the full story. And he's already on record in his own emails, in his own words, how he wants to shut down people talking. Otherwise, he won't get what he wants. That's what his emails say. His words, not mine. That's what he says in his emails, that he wants to shut down the opposition. Otherwise, it'll kill the deal. And he wants the deal to go forward. So that's very important because I wanted you to have a full context. And you can look us up, as I said, Oneida Dispatch, the Observer Dispatch, WRVO, WUTQ, have extensive research on this, as well as an article that I've written on it with the actual FOIA documents, so you can look that up. So I don't believe he was being very honest there. And I know for a fact, and that's why I said he didn't answer the question, especially when he promised the jobs to the union workers. For every union worker out there, please keep in mind, this is 2 to 3 years away. The hospital is still in the discussion about the eminent domain, taking away homes from individuals and businesses in that blighted area he talked about that they don't want to leave. They have rebuilt that area. They say they want to stay there, including a charity that he is going to be kicking out against their will. They say they won't sell. Eminent domain means that they have to take it away from them. And he supports that. I don't know if you do. That's a different question, but you can look this up. So he's not being very clear and very honest that on this project, which will take 2 to 3 years before anyone in the southern tier might get a job. So all of those union workers who are saying, yay, and he's saying, oh, I'm going to get you some of these 1,000 jobs. Now, and I want to be, that's something else I'm going to get into, but for those 1,000 jobs that he's promising that people are going to be able to get, one, he didn't say how many people are going to get them in the southern tier. Two, he didn't tell anyone that's 3 years from now. So I hope if you're waiting for the job and you're a union that you can wait 3 years for the opportunity to go up there. And he didn't say how many people. So it could be 20 people. It could be 50 people. It could be 5 people. And he'd be able to say, well, I lived up to my word. It's the details that make a difference. It's the details and the questions that we need to ask, because it's very important to know how this works. Because he answered parts of the question and he made a promise about a part of what's going on, but he didn't give the details, and the details make a difference. But I did ask him another question. I did ask another question of Anthony Brindisi. And what I'm going to do is, once again, I'm going to do my little news flash because I love that. And then what you're going to hear is the second question I asked that night. It happened to be the second to last question of the evening. And once again, it's based on his record, his public words and announcements to everyone. I'm going to play it, and then I'm going to go over it with you, and then you can make up your own mind on that. But if you'll hold on 1 second, we're going to listen to exactly what was said by Anthony Brindisi to my question on May 21st in Binghamton, New York at the VFW 1645.
Newsflash. Newsflash.
Michael, Miss Penny's big supporter here. Go ahead.
Actually, I'm an independent person.
Okay.
Well, if you can convince me of a reason to vote for you, then I would.
All right.
I've taken on Republicans and Democrats along with the last 12
We'll see when I
years.
listen to you, Bob Joseph, next week.
You'll probably hear me tomorrow.
Okay.
But more importantly, we've heard a lot of people talking about jobs. And it's been mentioned several times here tonight. We've heard a lot of people promise jobs before. Hillary Clinton promised 300,000 jobs. We lost 30,000.
I'm not promising jobs.
No. But, and I know that many politicians do that, I can tell you. But you did promise that if we were to allow you to, along with several other representatives, in the Griffiths International Airport, to create a drone testing site. And you yourself said in 2013, you promised that we would be generating roughly 2,000 jobs for that area, and that it would bring in, for New York State,
I don't know if I said that, but go ahead.
Actually, you did. Okay. I can get you the article if you would like.
Please do.
It was 468 to 2,000 jobs, you said, and you gave a range.
Okay.
3 interviews.
Okay.
And you also said they would bring in roughly about $70 million in tax revenue. And as of this point, it has not done that. It actually has cost taxpayers in New York State $21 million per person. And we now find, just last week, that we have failed to receive a government program, which you are now appealing, along with Anthony Brindisi. I understand that. But that has been a failure. So I ask you, what concrete plan do you have that we can hold you accountable to if you were to be elected, and more importantly, so that we can judge whether or not you have a good plan?
I don't think the people in Rome, New York would say that project has been a failure. I encourage you to go talk
How many jobs were created?
I would encourage you to go talk to the mayor of Rome. I would encourage you to go talk to the officials there, people who have businesses there on the particular drone test site. We were actually very fortunate here in New York State. People don't realize this. We are one of 7 FAA approved up in Rome and Oneida County drone test sites for commercial purposes. So essentially, companies like Amazon or government agencies like NASA or smaller companies who are looking at going into they call it unmanned aerial vehicles. They don't like when they call it drones, but who are looking to commercialize that technology and be the next to be able to get new products and testing online. They're doing all that testing. We formed a partnership with Syracuse all the way to the Griffiths Business Park in Rome for a drone corridor. And essentially what happens is all these unmanned aerial vehicles are able to be tested there, and then companies who are interested in doing more research will come there and locate. We just had one company who was in the agricultural industry who has relocated there, who is interested in drones because they use the drones for detecting pesticides in the field. You know, instead of the pesticide getting out of control and then you have to spray the whole field, which is not good for the fruit or vegetable or the environment, what happens is these drones are able to detect the pesticide when it's in a small portion of the field, and then they can target the pesticide there to kill whatever insect is trying to invade the field. That's one use of these drones. Amazon has talked about using them for package delivery. NASA has just signed an agreement with the test site up there to do research. Other companies use it for surveying. Many state agencies are using it for detection of structures like bridges and things like that to determine if they're compromised. So there's many, many industries. This is one of those new industries that New York has made an investment in, and for good reason, because we want to see more growth and more people are looking to use these kinds of, and companies are looking to use the UAV industry to help grow their business. And this is a good thing for the state, so I'll never apologize, Michael, for supporting it. And you should ask Ms. Tenney the same question. How many jobs were created? You should ask Ms. Tenney the same question, because she's also was touting how she was supportive of the industry recently during an announcement that was made about this test center.
I will ask her that, but you mentioned...
When she goes to town hall, make sure you ask her.
I know, but I have been at an event. I will ask you this, but you didn't answer my question.
Hello, folks. So, we just listened to Anthony Brindisi, and let me start off with first, and I go back to Jordan Peterson and the comfort, the lack. Obviously, Anthony Brindisi was not comfortable in answering a question about his record because he started off, actually, he's just not comfortable because before I could even ask a question, he had already started to attack me. He's already trying to mold the question. Now, I am a constituent. Yes, I'm a political commentator, have been for over a decade. Yes, I've known him for 5 years. Yes, we don't agree with each other very often on the issues or his record and his success rate. That's besides the point. I say that with full disclosure. I have many articles about many issues. But on this issue, this is his record. This is his promise. By the way, Mr. Brindisi is asking about when did he do this. You can actually go to my website, mvass.com. You can look at the July 2015 letter that I sent him that he never responded to, speaking about this issue and exactly his quote and exactly the promise he made about the jobs that were going to be created by this drone test site. So he already has the information. He says he doesn't know any articles, which is a convenient answer since he was just speaking about this issue and all the jobs that it was going to be creating. For a man who doesn't know what he said, he seems to know a lot about this issue. And that's something that's very interesting and it's very telling. Listen to it, go back and play it over if you want to. He's talking about NASA. He's talking about Amazon and their agreements, their partnerships. He didn't mention a job. They're using the facilities, but that's just like I'm renting a car. It doesn't mean I own the car. The car is still owned by Avis or Hertz. It's not owned by me, but I'm using it. And can I make some money off of that? Absolutely. Now, a question would be, well, how much money? Notice he didn't mention how much money is being generated by this facility. He promised $70 million. Let's say it's even half that, $35 million. He didn't mention how much money is generating. It would appear to be less than that. He wouldn't mention how many jobs were created. And if they're only renting or using the space, well, that's not a job created. It's not. And it's very telling that he's saying there are jobs created. I know for a fact, as I have written about in 2014, 2015, 2016, the last, and I also checked with, and these are reports, and I have FOIA documents on this from the Department of Transportation from New York, the city of Rome, as well as New Air, which is the corporation that owns the site and runs that, as well as the FAA, asking them how many jobs have actually been created, how much revenue has actually been created. And the only answer I have been able to determine is that there were 11 jobs created. I also know that there have been other news media who have reported on this, and they have reported that it cost $256 million plus, because that was in 2016, that we have spent taxpayer dollars, $256 million, which for 11 jobs works out to $23 million per job. So if this facility were to be at this moment making $35 million, even if it was $20 million, it would take 11 years for it to pay back consistently. If we consistently are getting $20 million in revenue, which from the number of companies he mentioned, we're not. But let's assume that every single one of those businesses are spending $4 or $5 million apiece every year, and that they're going to use this facility for the next decade. We would only break even, which does not mean that New York State makes the revenue. It still misses the revenue that he's promised, and it still misses the jobs he promised. So his being very facetious and very arrogant seems to be very much misplaced. So either he knows the number and doesn't want to tell the public that he's asking for his vote how many jobs were created, which means he failed, and he doesn't want people to know that, or he doesn't know what the number is, which means he's not paying attention to things that he himself did. If he's creating jobs, you would think he would pay attention to it, since that was his bill that helped fund this, that it was his work, his efforts to get this done, that he wants to take the credit for. It was his duty to know what's going on there, and he just let it go. That's the other option. He let it go. It doesn't matter to him. He doesn't care because it's already been done. He already got the credit for it. He already got the newspaper ads for it, headlines for it, and he already got the votes for it. So it doesn't matter anymore whether it's successful or not. Those are the two options. He knows and doesn't want to tell you because he failed, or it's success of some degree, and he just doesn't want to tell him. He doesn't know because he doesn't care. That's the only two options I can see. And yet he's being very arrogant and he's being very duplicitous because he doesn't say anything to anyone. Kind of like with the Utica Hospital, where he's promising unions in the southern tier that they're going to get jobs. He doesn't tell anyone when those jobs will come, which would be 2 to 3 years. He doesn't tell anyone how many people would be employed, which would be 5. He doesn't say that. These are important things because it sounds really good. You feel really comfortable when he said, oh, this has got, Amazon, great big name. Yes, NASA, great big name. But he didn't answer the question. He distracted from the question. And he did so in a very arrogant way. And then he turned around the question when he was asked again, over and over, repeatedly, how many jobs were created. He said, oh, no, that doesn't matter. He didn't even answer that. He ignored it. He doesn't want to answer that, or he doesn't know the answer to that. And he says, well, why don't you go and ask people? I have FOIA documents, and I've sent the letter to him with the FOIA documents, and I've made public the articles about this years ago. So he has this. He's had access. He just didn't care. It wasn't important to him. And I think that's a very big thing. That makes a very big difference. So that's kind of important. And when you take that into account, and I know this is something that he's remembered because quite honestly, after following it in 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, not seeing any growth, not seeing the revenue, not seeing any of the promises being matched, I got tired. I've been following other things. I have a life too. And there's a lot of issues that are going on in this nation that I cover, as you know. So I have forgotten about it for a little bit until there was the article that just came out. It was covered by the Observer Dispatch, the newspaper in the Utica area that I mentioned before. And on May 15th, we found out that the New Air Test Facility, the drone testing site at Griffiths International Airport, failed to get a federal program that would allow it to grow and continue, just as it was promised that we would be, because we're one of the 7 test sites, we would be able to get this federal program, pilot program about the drones and really ramp up the business. And in fact, Griffiths International Airport was declined by the federal government. And I know this because he wrote a letter that he provided to the Observer Dispatch talking glowingly about how well this site is going, even though the government just said it isn't going well, and they declined to involve the Griffiths International Airport. And that's when I mentioned that he wrote a letter to about this with Anthony Brindisi, who's the county executive there. And that was again on May 15th, 2018 in the Observer Dispatch. The title of that is the Brindisi-Picenti, Why Was Drone Proposal Passed Over? So this is something that he knows. It's on his mind. And on top of that, I also asked him about this in Norwich, New York, back in April 25th. So before the federal government came out with an answer, I asked him this in person in Norwich about this, and he didn't have an answer. This came out in the Observer Dispatch on May 15th. On May 22nd, I asked him about it. He obviously had researched it because he wrote a letter about it. So I'm left with the answer that he knows the answer. He just doesn't want voters to know the answer, and he won't tell anyone. Now, you may think that's not important. The fact that he's arrogant about this may not be important. You may think that the fact that he doesn't want to tell voters what's going on is not important. And you may think that this is a promise kept even though we don't know anything about it and he won't reveal any details about it. That's for you. I don't agree. I find it very troubling. And that's why I want to bring it to you. And you get to hear his words, exactly what he said. And I'd show you video of how angry he was at the time when he was speaking to me and how he was turning red of face. And there are witnesses to this, obviously a room full of people actually, when this was going on. But since I was denied the opportunity to tape, I couldn't do that. And luckily someone else was able to provide me with audio because they thought it would be interesting. So I wanted to provide that to you. But there is still one last thing, which is one last conversation I had about all this. And I'm going to get to that in just a moment. Instead, we're going to take a break, and then we'll come back because it's interesting to see how the rest of the media reacted to this. Because you weren't the first ones, sadly, you weren't the first ones I brought this to. I brought this to WNBF, and I talked about this because voters need to know everything I've just told you. Shorter form, but tell everybody this on the news radio. And I'll tell you exactly how that went when we come back from our break in just a moment. Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming back to the No Soundbites Allowed podcast. And your host, Michael Voss, the Dragon of the Southern Tier. I am so happy to be here with you, and I thank you. I thank you all for being here with me, especially on this special episode where it's going a little long. I do understand that, but I do want to make sure people are able to get the full context of exactly what was going on and exactly what happened at the event with Anthony Brindisi. I'm doing this because it is important that a candidate for Congress or any elected official be very clear and very honest with the public. And whenever any candidate is not, and I don't care what party they're in, if they're a Republican, they're an independent, if they're a conservative, if they're a Democrat, it doesn't matter. Okay. Whatever, whomever it is. And I have historically and consistently, I've been following every election for the New York 22nd District since 2010. This is now 2018. I've been doing this rodeo a couple of times. I have checked out every candidate. I have always provided an opportunity for every candidate that has run in this race to be able to do an interview and to have their words come out to the public, published word for word without any edit. I always do that in every interview I've done, with Senator Akshar, Assemblywoman Donna Lopardo, Mayors Matt Ryan, Mayor Alfred Mitch, Mayor Rich David, but every politician and every candidate. And I have given a voice to every single candidate out there, whether they are someone who is expected to win and for those that are not. Okay, libertarians and challengers within the Democratic Party, challengers within the Republican Party, all of them. Why? Because I want to make sure that you know exactly who is the best person to support, that you know that you've made the right choice and that you have all the information available. And since I do spend so much time for a decade now, actually more, following each and every one of these politicians, and I've known so many of these politicians like Mr. Brindisi for 5 years, I want you to know what's going on when they aren't giving you the answers. And I understand many of them are very good because it sounds great when you're listening to them and they give you an answer and it sounds like, wow, you answered the question. And that's why it needs to be recorded. So you can go back and go, wait a minute, that didn't answer the question. You know, when we're talking about drones, the question is, how many jobs were created? Because this project failed. You didn't bring in the revenues you promised. You didn't bring in the jobs you promised. Just like Hillary Clinton, who promised 300,000 jobs, and we lost 30,000 jobs in upstate New York. It's the same thing. You know, Mr. Brindisi, you promised up to 2,000 jobs. How many jobs were actually created? You promised $70 million in tax revenues. How much has actually come in? You spent taxpayer dollars. We've spent over $256 million of taxpayer dollars for this facility. What did we get back for it? That's a really good question, and he never answered that. He talked about how wonderful it was, even though the federal government declined to include it in a pilot program, but we don't know. So I thought that was very important, and so I turned around, and as I mentioned to him, when he asked, because he knows I'm a public figure, I get on the talk radio programs in Utica as well as in Binghamton, and he knew I was going to come out and I was going to speak about my experience, just as I did about the experience in Norwich. And so I did. As I told him, I'll probably be on there tomorrow. Well, as it was, on May 22nd, I did go on the Bob Joseph program, which is in the Binghamton, New York. It's located in Binghamton, New York. It's a call-in news radio program. Call letters are WNBF. I enjoy it. I've been on there as a regular call-in guest, as well as I go on to speak as an invited guest, a featured guest of the program. Oh, I'd say, I don't know, between the two, about once a month, maybe once a month, I wind up on air at least, if not very often, half dozen times, a dozen times per month. And that's been true for the last 5 years, roughly, that I've been on the program every month, just about. So, I'm a well-known figure there, and my history is well-known there. And so I called in so that I could express and share with the rest of the constituents my experience. I never asked anyone to not vote for Mr. Brindisi, but I do want them to know the experience, and I want them to know the full details and full context. And so I went on with that intention on WNBF. And again, the host of the program, Bob Joseph, who you'll be hearing in a second, I get along with. We're actually very friendly. We have great conversations. I've spoken with him on a host of issues, and sometimes we've disagreed as well. And we've had on a lot of issues, and we've covered everything. National politics, local politics, various politicians, lots of issues, and just, sometimes just, I like this movie, I didn't like that movie, stuff like that too. So he covers it all, and I have to give Bob Joseph credit. He is a very open voice. He allows people call in that don't agree with him, people call in that do agree with him, and he gives them the opportunity to speak. Some more than others, given, if you're telling him you don't like him, he probably won't keep you on very long, but he will let you call in and say that. And he's had arguments. I've had arguments with him before and disagreements, and we've hung up with that. And at the same time, I've called back the next day and we're perfectly fine because we understand people should have the ability to express their thoughts, that we should ask questions. And even though it's uncomfortable, that allows us to grow and to learn and know more, whether or not we agree with it. Much like Jordan Peterson said at the beginning, that quote from him. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play the entire conversation I had with Bob Joseph. And I want you to notice what happens at about the 3-minute mark, because I go over what I've been talking about and what happened. And as you've heard yourself, exactly what was being said by Mr. Brindisi, by myself, about the issue, and you've been able to analyze this. And again, you'll have links to be able to look at all of the information about the drone testing site as well. But then I went on, and Bob is familiar with this information. I've talked about it before. And so I went on today, on the 22nd, to talk about it. And what you're going to hear now is that full conversation. And at the 3-minute mark, you'll be surprised. And again, this is someone who knows me for 5 years. So with that said, we're going to go, it's not breaking news. This is an Inception blast. This is, get ready.
WNBF, open lines now at 772-1290. Michael Vasquez from Binghamton. Good morning. You're on the air.
Good morning, Bob. How are you today?
I'm doing well.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. It's been a good show so far. Glad to hear about the recycling. The reason why I'm calling, by the way, I know that you have a special listener out there, Mr. Anthony Brindisi. He mentioned he'd be listening today because I was speaking with him yesterday at his town hall here in Binghamton at the VFW. I don't know if you heard about that. Well,
I wasn't there, but I know we talked with Mr. Brindisi yesterday that he was going to hold that.
Mm-hmm. And I was at the event, and I found it quite interesting because it's upsetting how I'm listening to Mr. Brindisi, and not only was he not answering some questions, both mine and others that were being asked, and talking around them once again, which I find upsetting about any candidate doing that. But I also found it very upsetting that I've been listening to him for 5 years in Utica and also throughout this campaign and the last one as well. And it seems that he's been changing his answers on several questions when he's speaking to different groups. And I've seen that in Norwich, I've seen that in Utica, and I see that now today, yesterday, in Binghamton. On top of which, the other thing that's very upsetting is he got very angry because a question was being asked of him. And that's incredible when someone's asking for your vote, and his response is to attack about when the question is being asked about his record. And I think that's really important. Obviously, you're running for a position, and if someone asks you about your record, in this case, we were talking about the drone testing site that he took taxpayer money, promoted, and he promised the public that there would be a creation of 400 to 2,000 jobs, $70 million, which has not happened. And it cost taxpayers about $21 million per job so far. And the question that I had asked him about this was, can you give us one, given that's your record, can you give us an actual program that you're looking at in our area that will provide extra jobs, that will create job growth? Instead of answering that, he attacked me personally. And also...
What did he say to you?
He tried to call me an operative.
Well, I mean, be crystal clear about your history, because you have sought the Republican nomination for Congress in this district. You're, to say you're not an activist. I mean, look, Mike, on one hand, you view yourself as a journalist. You record interviews and you post blogs, opinion blogs, and call in on this program with opinions. And then on the other hand, you make it sound as though that you're just a citizen, any old citizen. I mean, you offered in the past to work for Claudia Tenney. I mean, we've talked about it on the program, so let's be crystal clear for people not familiar with your history. You've worked for the Republican side in the 22nd District, and you've been opposed to Democrats in the past. So, I don't know how you define operative.
Let me be clear. One, I have never been paid by any group, any organization, ever. I lose money every year doing it. I am a political commentator, and I've taken on Republicans, Democrats, and Independents. That's Babinec, that's George Phillips, that's Richard Hanna, that's a host of people. So, and the purpose of all of that is always to expose whenever anyone who is a candidate or in elected office is not representing the truth to the candidate. That they're not letting the public know what their positions are, what their history is, or they're giving answers that are not absolutely consistent. And everyone should do that. And that's what I was trying to do. And I asked him a question about his record. And I asked him about his future proposal if he were to be elected. And he denied that. And he attacked me instead. And he made an accusation that's unfounded. I've never worked for anyone. So that's
you've never been paid to work for anyone. But again,
what have I done?
I mean, you to say that you're not, you make it sound as though you haven't been actively involved on the Republican side in the New York 22nd Congressional District, and the truth is otherwise. Maybe you weren't paid to support Claudia Tenney. Maybe in the past you weren't paid by anyone to speak out against Richard Hanna, but you've been very active, and just because no money changed hands, I think you need to be crystal clear about your involvement. When is the last time you asked these hard questions at a public forum to Claudia Tenney?
I have actually asked them.
When?
I have asked.
When? Where?
The last time that I had an interview with her. I haven't.
No, in a public forum, at a public meeting.
That's on YouTube right now. I've had that.
At a meeting.
I had a chance to have. I have a request in to have an interview with her.
No, I'm not talking about an interview. Not an interview. I'm talking about at a public meeting where she took questions from constituents. Did you do anything similar with Claudia Tenney to what you did with Anthony Brindisi last night?
Sadly, and one of the problems I have is she has not had a public forum that I can do that.
Well, there, so.
And that's a fair, and as I said to him last night, that, as soon as she does, I will.
Well, we are awaiting. So, but again, to make it seem as though that you haven't already been working for Republican candidates, and at one time that you yourself didn't try to be a Republican candidate in the district is...
That is misrepresentation, Bob. I don't work for anyone.
Well, explain
I'm
about your...
commentator.
So explain when you tried to get, for a short time, or we're talking about trying to secure the Republican nomination in the 22nd District.
Bob, I am not working for anyone. I cover all politics now.
No, but wasn't there a time that you talked about trying to run for Congress in the 22nd District? I'm not talking about you working for anyone. We've established you haven't been paid by anyone to serve as a political operative.
And in 2013, I ran. That is a public record. That's a public fact.
All right, and that should be stipulated before every time that you question another congressional candidate that you've been in that position before in this district. Not everybody knows that. Not everybody knows it, though. You didn't say at the start of this call, of course, I've been involved as a prospective candidate over the years in this district, and then I asked a Democratic candidate some of these questions. I mean, that's all part of the context.
Well, I'm sorry. You know what? Yes, I could have said that, and I didn't say that because I assumed I've been on your program many, many times. We've had this discussion many, many times to all the listeners, and I took the assumption that this is well known because it is.
But we don't have the same listeners every day. Not everybody knows your history. All right, Michael Vasquez, we're out of time. The news is coming up next. WNBF Binghamton.
All right, folks. I hope you found that interesting, because I did. It was a big surprise to me. And actually, I had several people who contacted me on Twitter to let me know how they were surprised as well. And I had people contact me on Facebook who let me know. Regular listeners to WNBF, and they were a bit surprised because that's unlike Bob to be so confrontational to someone that he knows and someone that is a regular guest on his program who is a known political commentator, someone who is known to actually speak to politicians and question them those who are on my same side of the subject of the political spectrum, as well as those opposed to my political spectrum. And this is well known to him. So it was quite surprising that, and quite honestly, at the third minute, if Bob thought for whatever reason that I was not giving enough disclosure to the listeners, and I give him that. You know, I could have said I wasn't thinking about the new listener, so people know who I am. That's why he goes Michael Voss and often calls me Mike from Binghamton on the program. But if I wasn't thinking about anyone new listening, and it could have been very simple, by the way, folks, Michael is a political commentator. Michael did run for Congress in 2013. He's a registered Republican, a conservative Republican. That's it. That takes 15 seconds. Now the public has full disclosure. If that was what you wanted to say, well, that's full disclosure. I'm not hiding it. As I said, I'm not hiding who I am. I'm a public figure. I am classified as a public figure. Here I am publicly talking to you. So that wasn't an issue. But he belabored that. And he went on for how many minutes there? Talking about and changing the subject. And there's the key. He changed the subject. Instead of going back to and focusing on what did this candidate for an elected office say and not say to the public, and why did he not tell the public the full truth, or why did he not answer the question, rather than doing that, instead, I was the subject. And suddenly and I have to tell you folks, I don't believe that 5 years ago when I ran for Congress, that's relevant to what happened 5 years later, yesterday, May 22nd. I don't see the connection. I mean, if anything, because I'm a political commentator, because I listen to all of the candidates and all of the elected officials in the New York 22nd district, a huge area of space, because I'm known to all of the elected officials out here, because I do read all of the bills that they write, and I do follow the bills that they write, and I do hold them accountable for that, because I'm known for that, if anything, I would think my voice would be even more important. And yes, you can take a grain of salt or a pound of salt if you wish to say, well, but you're on the other side of the political aisle, which I don't hear people question when I take on Republicans for when they fail, as I mentioned. And as my history shows, and you can look it up on Google and check it out. My website hasn't changed. It's every single article's still there. Every podcast is still out there. So you can hear when I take on Republicans, when I take on Democrats and progressives and independents and conservatives, when I think they're doing a great job and when I think they're not. So that's not the issue. And if anything, it makes it more important. And because it is more important, then, and Mr. Joseph believed that it was important for people to know who I am for whatever reason. If they didn't know and they wanted to find out, then he needed to just say, and Michael's a political commentator who happens to be a Republican and ran for Congress in 2015. But instead you allege that he made the same supposition as was being made by Mr. Brindisi, that I'm an operative of some sort, that I work for a campaign. No, I don't. Please show me that proof. I speak to every politician. No one says that I'm an operative of the Democratic Party when I speak to Democratic candidates, that when I have conversations with them in email and phone calls that aren't always for the public consumption. I speak to a lot of people. I get a lot of information from a lot of different sources that I talk about in all of these things, in all the campaigns. And I have conversations I know these people for many years now. I have conversations with them. So, but no one ever says that I'm an operative for the Conservative Party or the Independence Party or for anything. Just now, because of Mr. Brindisi and because I have a question for him based on his words, and I'm bringing up his words, which he is fully and willing and able to listen to WNBF as he promised that he would be, and he was looking forward to hearing this, and I acknowledged that he would be listening to this, to call in and make a statement so the public would know his point of view, or to be able to provide any coverage of the incident itself, as I have just done, so that the public can make a judgment for themselves. Perhaps you think that I was wrong. Perhaps you think that I was overboard. Maybe I misread it. Maybe because of my personal knowledge, I have a different interpretation. These are all valid questions. I don't believe that they're accurate, but they're valid questions. But that's why we need to have full disclosure, in the sense that when the question is asked, it should be answered. And when the public is at a public event for someone asking for their vote, it should be expressly allowed for anyone to be able to tape that and hold that candidate accountable for the words that they have said. And when you go to the major news media, you shouldn't take away and distract from that subject because you don't agree. Because I believe that showed that there's a bit of bias there in the media. And I continue to think Bob is a great guy, and I'll continue to call to WNBF, and I will speak on the program, and I still have no problem with Bob. I do have a problem with how he handled that incident and to the extreme he went to, but we all have bad days, and I'm sure that, and I have no ill will. None. But I want people to know this is what you're looking at in the New York 22nd race in 2018. I don't know how many of you are going to get this far into the episode. It's a long episode, and I'm going to try and get a transcript made of it so that you can read it. But I want people to know exactly what they're dealing with. Exactly what you're dealing with. And if Mr. Brindisi, Anthony, if you're out there and you're listening to this, and I know that your staff do listen to my program, and I do know that you hear what I say, come on to the program. Refute anything that I've said. If you wish to make that case. If you want to let people know answers to the questions, come on down. I will tape it. I will provide it word for word, verbatim, and I will publish that. Absolutely. If I have misunderstood something, I will say so on this program and on air and make sure that people know that what I've gotten wrong, if that is the case. That is my challenge to Mr. Brindisi and to any candidate, because I cover a lot of races, locally, nationally, always. I will always provide verbatim information of anyone I interview, and I will always strive to provide you the sources of all the information that I receive, that I make the conclusions on. I work off of fact. These are facts. My conclusions you may not agree with, and that's okay. And you may not, I'm not telling you to vote one way or another, but I do want you to have the facts so you can make the best choice based on that information. And if Mr. Brindisi, Anthony, if you want to come on the program and you want to make sure that your case is heard, please do. You have an open invitation for over a year, and I'm still waiting for the call. You have my phone number. But folks, with that, I know it's been a long episode. It's a special episode. I wanted to make sure that everything is on the record because I always want you to know what's going on. So I thank you for having gone this far with me and to hear it all. And I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope it's been informative for you. And with that, I'm going to let you go. And I'll look forward to speaking to you all on Saturday.